thanks for coming out, and I want to acknowledge some people quickly first. There's a lot of folks who were involved in the production of this film in the audience, including Tony Peck, who first started shooting. We started shooting this movie in 2014, and Tony came along early on this ride, and I said, I think there's this great story I'm working on, and if we don't start interviewing these people now, I don't know if they'll be around to interview, and I don't think we can tell the story. And Tony said yes, and so I have to acknowledge that as it wouldn't have happened without Tony. And secondly, Robert Benavidez. Robert is a great DP and a great producer. He DP'd tons of stuff, including new Chris Rock and Kevin Hart documentary that's on Netflix. But he also did the Tribe Called Quest documentary, and I spoke with Rob and said, I really need your help on this. And Rob joined a board, and I'm really grateful to that for that. Also, Mary Squires, Mary McAnulty, who is a producer who really worked with me on the story. And this is a very difficult film to cut because there's so many aspects of this story. Boxing, wrestling, whether it be punk rock, LA history, and Eileen Eaton's story. And so to weave them through was a real challenge, and I thank Mary so much for making that part of the process possible. And I want to thank my wife Stacy, who's a great journalist and a great person who stood by me through all of this. And I'd also like to thank one more person, who's Gene Aguilera, who Gene opened up all of his boxing knowledge and relationships, and was so instrumental in this, and is also my co-curator on the documentary. And I also want to thank all of the folks at La Plaza for making this exhibition happen, and for supporting the screening. So a lot of gratitude for a lot of people in this room. So getting that out of the way, I really would like to welcome our special guest, Cheech, here. I wanted to talk to you because a friend of mine who's in this audience, Ed Eckstein, from the music business, an old friend from the music business, he called me up one day. He's like, "Hey man, you should turn on Tavis Smiley has Cheech Marin on there, and he's talking about the Olympic Auditorium, and you gotta check it out," because Ed knew that I was working on this documentary, and you were talking about Bobo Brazil and other Olympic stuff, and how it impacted your life. And then I picked up your autobiography, and it had these great stories. I was like, I gotta get to Cheech. I want to get him in this movie, and I never was able to get to you. But thankfully, through the museum, we met at the museum, and we now connect, because you have a lot of great Olympic memories. So one of the things you mentioned in your autobiography was it Lola? Was it
Grandma Lola?
Your Grandma Lola. Can you first tell us how your first memories of the Olympic Auditorium. What was it about it, and how do you remember it?
Well, I grew up in this neighborhood with the Olympic Auditorium, 36 in San Pedro, and I've been through every single phase that you saw up there tonight in the picture. I was intimately involved with boxing, wrestling, roller derby, and then rock and roll after that. The first contact with the Olympic is I used to watch, I guess it was Wednesday night wrestling from the Olympic.
Yeah.
And with my grandmother, who spoke no English, And she kind of understood English, kind of when she wanted to. But then she only spoke Spanish, and we used to watch. I was a little kid. I used to watch it with her. She loved wrestling, and that was the only time I ever saw her animated because she was real dour, you know. And she would jump all over it in Spanish. Watch out, he's behind you, you know. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Why is that wearing a mask? Oh, there's Mexicans in there too, you know. It was a tag team wrestling match. You know the Mexican tag team?
With Corbin and Goliath? Or no, earlier?
The brothers.
Torres brothers?
Torres brothers, yeah. Badass.
Yeah.
But at Olympics, being in the neighborhood, we used to go actually too there all the time and see wrestling live. But my mother used to take me. My dad was a policeman in LAPD, and kind of that area was in his beat at times, you know. So he was real friendly with all the promoters and everybody that, you know, ran the thing. So we got into a lot of those. And then boxing, we grew up boxing. That was like Mexican entertainment after dinner. Gloves on the kids. The gloves were very lifted up. We grew up watching boxing all the time. And then roller derby. We had a cousin, Silvia Viramontes, was a roller derby skater. And this girl I grew up with, my next door neighbor, Bonnie Nelson, became a roller derby skater too. We used to skate together, and that was at the Olympic.
Well, I think one of the things that strikes me about the Olympic that I love was that it was a platform where outsiders, anyone could be a star, could become a star. People who didn't have an opportunity. Yeah, you might have to get beat up, you might have to get hurt, but it was a platform for people from Mexico, people from the city, but people who wouldn't have a chance somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's what attracted me in so many ways to this story is you see so many LA documentaries, and God bless them, yeah, the movie business of course is important, but this was like people's entertainment, and I felt like it was just like a story that hadn't been told, and it has like the grit of the city and the complexity and the crazy mix of LA.
Yeah, that golden age of boxing here, man. It was like I used to watch it all the time. It was live on TV, you know. You could watch it all the time with my dad. That was one of his favorite things. But wow, it was a tough way to make a buck. hitting the head for 15 rounds is a tough way to make a buck, man. But that's it. But boxing has endured. It has, you know, different vogues. It comes in waves and it comes again. And Ali Eaton was champion. Muhammad Ali, who was my personal all-time hero. I got him to sign my draft card.
Oh, right, you know that story. Can you tell that story?
Well, he had just won the championship, just beat what's his face, Liston, and there was a big rally in Century City, and we were just building the Century City Hotel, and it was an anti-war rally, and we all gathered there in the park. I was a part of the draft resistance, and he was speaking there, and I was just the thing I was most impressed with. This was the biggest, most perfect physical specimen I had ever seen. He's big. He's like 6'4", and he was like just huge guy, and he gave us a speech, and as we standing on the platform of this truck, we had our draft cards up to him, he'd sign them. M. Ali, I'm with you if you with me. He's my guy.
Yeah, I mean, an incredible guy, and people forget, he did spend a lot of time in Los Angeles. He was here, and he had a second home here, he was here a lot.
Yeah. And he was young. I mean, when he won the championship, he was what, how, 20s, early 20s?
Early 20s, yeah.
Something like that.
So let's talk about wrestling a little bit, because I know you mentioned in your autobiography, you mentioned Bobo Brazil.
No, Bobo Brazil is a favorite. Anybody remember ever seeing him, Bobo Brazil? Wrestler? That one guy. He was actually an All-American football player from Ohio State University. Harrison, I think Herbert Harrison or something was his real name. But I knew him because my best friend Jesse, when I went to grammar school, Trinity Street School, his mother did Bobo Brazil's laundry. And And his house was right across the street from the school. And so Bo Brazil would come in his big white-ass Cadillac with zebra upholstery, and with the top down, and he'd come in to pick up his laundry, and the whole school would, the player would run to the fence, man. And because Jesse was my friend, we got called up by Bo Brazil to the front, and he'd give us a quarter in front of the whole school. I think show business, yeah, this is it. And we get paid, all right.
So was it one of your first glimpses at okay, this is cool.
That's good work,
That's great. And another thing that that you mentioned in your autobiography is well, tell me more about roller derby too. I know you had some favorites in roller derby. Who were some of your roller derby favorites?
Well, the T-Birds from LA, so there were Stretch Saunders and Tuffy Bassoon and all those guys. And Bonnie Nelson. She was actually, we grew up together. She was my next door neighbor. We started skating together. I was little, but I was really fast. And she went on to be a professional roller derby skater, so we had that in common. And me and my friend Jesse, we used to, when we got in the Olympic Auditorium, to watch roller derby, because it's a banked track and the ends go up like that. And we were little kids, and we'd go into the high end of that, and that's where all the opponents used to gather up there to plan their nefarious deeds they were going to do this next time. And we'd hear all the shit that they were planning, man. And so we tried to run over there and tell the T-Birds. So one of the big villains during that era of women roller derby skaters was Little Iodine, Loretta Barron's. I don't know because it was a cartoon character called Little Iodine, and she was irritant to everybody. And so Little Iodine, roller derby skater, was this, and she was a head troublemaker with the Bay Bombers, and she would get there and plan all her shit. And so many years later, I'm on the road with John, and our opening band was War. You know the band War? Yeah. And Sidney Barons was the harmonica player in the band at the time. We started talking one night after the show, and he says, I said, well, where do you grow up, blah, 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 what do you do, blah, blah. And he says, my sister's coming down to see our show tomorrow night. Oh yeah, what does she do? He says, well, she was a roller derby skater. Right? What was her name? Little Iodine, Loretta Barron's. And she was the sister of this guy. She came down to see her. I told her all this shit, man. We used to listen to you plan all your stuff. And boy, was that like being transported back to one of your superheroes? Yeah. Anybody see roller derby live? Has anybody ever seen roller derby live besides? Well, it's a few. Yeah. It's exciting, huh?
Yeah, it was great meeting all the skaters. Honey's on fire. She's still on fire. She's so hilarious, and so has purple hair. And God, I love her. Now, on the music side of things, okay, so Little Richard. So one of the things we were unable to include in the film because we dug and could find no video, no audio, no even pictures of it, but incredibly vivid stories of this particular incident that happened in 1970 when Little Richard was on tour and played for Bill Graham at the Olympic Auditorium. Now, you had interviewed him before this, is that correct?
I was in Vancouver. I was living in Vancouver at the time, and I was working for this magazine, Poppin' Magazine, which was a rock and roll magazine in Vancouver. And they sent me to interview Little Richard. And so we did this big interview, and he was hilarious, let me tell you. and so we had so we get back to LA, and my friend John Hammond Jr. was a blues folk guitar player. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him. And he was the son of probably the most famous record producer at that era, John Hammond Sr., who discovered Bob Dylan and Aretha Franklin, Miles Davis, it goes on and on. And he was playing, and he was opening for Little Richard. at the Olympic Auditorium. So I went down to see him, and he comes off, and then we go back to his dressing room, and we're talking, hey, I haven't seen you in a little while, blah, 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 blah. And we're talking, and he says, oh man, I forgot to get my check. I said, oh, well, who's going to give it to you? Well, he names his promoter, who I knew because we had just worked with him. And he says, I know where he is because I just saw him go on the stage. I'll go get it for you. You take chill, I'll be right back. So I go down there, and if you notice that stage, it all slopes right down. I mean, the auditorium slopes right down to the front of the stage. And I was really shocked that they could get 10,400 people in that place. I mean, because they're on you, you know. And so I got to the stage, and it's really down there, and I see him walking around, and so I go down there, and he's at the edge of the stage, and he sees me, and he motions me to come on the stage. And so we go in the back of the stage, and I tell him, hey, I'm here to get John's check, and blah, blah, blah. He said, oh, no problem, I think I got it right here. And he takes it out of his pocket and gives it to me, and just as he gives it to me, he goes, and he looks at me, he says, run. What the fuck? Run! And the stage collapses. I mean, craters right in the middle. And they had these big ass speakers on both sides, because there was this early days of, you know, playing these big audiences. And Little Richard was right in the middle of his act, almost naked, standing on top of the piano, giving it his all. Yeah, and the fucking stage comes down, man. I don't know how everybody lived, or, you know, there was a lot of broken bones and stuff. It was like in the cartoons, big cloud of dust. I jumped off the stage just as they're, man, Olympic Auditorium strikes again. It
was a chaotic joy, man. I mean, the story of it's unfortunate. My friend Jim Kodas, who was supposed to be here, he helped build that stage and was running the spot that night.
I want to talk to him.
Well, the story behind it was that, you know, I mean, Richard he had started to invite the whole crowd on stage, and the context behind it was like, Country Joe and the Fish were supposed to close the show, and Little Richard didn't like anyone to close the show but him. And so I wonder if this was a plan. But anyway, the stage wasn't constructed to have, you know, Little Richard the band plus, you know, gyrating members of the crowd dancing as Little Richard worked them all into a frenzy. And yeah, it was. If you follow the Olympic Auditorium Facebook page, there's an incredible. It's really one of the greatest posts that we've done. Not so much that our post was so great, but the contributors of people who were there that night was incredible, because it was also. I mean, you can give context to that time. Like there were cops that were like harassing people in the venue. There was like
harassing my ass.
Yeah,
I waited into the middle of the crowd, beating people up and dragging them out. You know, like this was during John Hammond's acoustic set. You know.
I mean, people forget, and I think that's one of the things that is so, you know, interesting about your life and your career is that you know, separately from the Olympic, is that you were on the edge of it. You were part of the counterculture. You were part of the resistance, then part of the counterculture, and helped create a different way, breaking down the way people see the world. And I think I'm honored to be here with you, because I think that it's a different world because of what you did, and that's great. Because I mean, the Olympic at that time, I mean, it's incredible to think that, you know, the stories that people told of that night were, it was scary. There were buses of sheriffs waiting outside to arrest people. They were chasing people through the halls and beating them up, and then riding Harleys at people. So, you know, this is
well, it was right before the punk thing that happened. Right before so we were trying rock and roll out in the building, and the cops didn't want it because it was long-haired hippies smoking weed and seeing all these bands. They didn't want that going on, so they protected it. It wasn't harassment. They would wait for the crowd and beat people up and drag them on in the middle of the show. Yeah, so it was like the unrest was really, really heavy in the auditorium when the stage went. It seemed like the fitting finale.
Well, and I think that was one of the things that, attracted me to the story in the first place, was that the Olympic reflected the city and the times over time. Like, you go back to the 20s, there were riots. I mean, one of the things that's really fascinating is there were riots at the Olympic going back to the 20s every decade. There were boxing riots, wrestling riots, punk rock riots, riots, for rock and roll throughout the eras. And I think that, to me, I see the Olympic as sort of symbolic of a lot of the shifts, the fights, the battles. This palace of violence was emblematic of the city that you grew up in and I grew up in.
That's what we used to call it in my family. We used to call it Sass Palace. It was fitting that it came to an end that way. And then so the city got what it wanted, no rock and rollers, but then the punks came in.
And it's like,
I remember that.
Is Gary Tovar here? He was supposed to be here. Is he here tonight or no? Gary, do you have any thoughts, any memories, anything you want to mention? Gary Tovar, who's in the movie, he started Golden Voice and promoted those punk rock shows. And anything you want to jump in on?
Well, one of my fondest memories was the Olympic shows during the Olympics. We had an international show. And I went upstairs and it was packed. 5,000 people, which is a lot for punk rock because it was a subculture still. But I remember I went upstairs and I saw 5 slam pits, like the 5 Olympic rings.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, this is it. This is the peak.
I went like the Olympics and softboxing at that auditorium.
Yeah, it's like I said, punk rock it burned hot. And within 2 years, the maulings were just too great. And girls wouldn't go. There'd be 99 guys and one girl. The girls stopped going. And when the girls stopped going, it ain't happening.
That's a death knell.
And so, like I said, it was like a shooting star. 2 years.
Yeah.
But it burned hot.
It did, especially the Olympic.
Yes.
Robbie Chung, Tommy's daughter used to do all those punk shows, and that's what we know all about.
Does anyone have any questions? Anybody questions or thoughts or anything?
Best fight you ever seen, Cheech?
Best fight? Oh, Danny Little Red Lopez. And he used to come in the room with a full warp on it, man. And he was fighting this Guatemalan fighter, I can't remember. But Daniel never woke up until he was either knocked down or almost knocked out or something happened. So the first round, this guy knocked him through the ring, out of the ring, and boom, and he somehow got back in, climbed it, and he finally woke up and knocked the first in 7 seconds. The next round knocks the other guy out, man. Like, well, that's boxing, man. That's just come back from that. Wow, tough way to make a buck still. Yeah.
Danny's great. Yeah, he took a lot of punishment though.
But a lot of guys didn't. Carlos Palomino didn't until he did. But the fighters that great revelation here. But yeah, the fighters that protected themselves, that didn't feel that Gene Aguilera can talk about Bobby Chacon and how Bobby Chacon really was he loved that visceral sense of the crowd. Bobby could box, but he loved fighting, and the crowd, he sacrificed himself for that. And there is a sort of like almost like a religious
sacrifice part of, I feel like the violent part of the Olympic, whether it was, simulated violence, as in wrestling, or real violence, was cathartic, but, people gave up a lot of their lives for that.
So it was very simple to understand it. Boxing, wrestling, roller derby, you just watch, you didn't need a language barrier, there was no acclimation to a culture, you just watch these guys go fast on skates and beat the shit out of each other, stand in front of each other, beat the shit out of each other. It's like, that's what boxing, wrestling, and roller derby is. That's what, it burns bright, and then just like punk rock, and then it fades and it comes back again because I don't know if it'll be stamped out.
Yeah, exactly. I think you look at the NFL, which is more violent. It's you watch a game and as entertaining as this, it's brutal as it's, and America loves it.
America loves it. It's a sporting event.
Yeah. Anybody else with any questions?
Yes, sir. Man.
I was gonna ask, so it's two questions. One is there's some shots of the Olympic Auditorium outside, but why not go inside? And the second question is, we'll start with the first question. Is why not go inside?
In terms of contemporarily,
Right.
Well, that was an interesting battle with the church.
Right.
The church had very mixed feelings about me and about this project, and wanting, there were elements of the church that welcomed and I was very, very respectfully and said, look, I'm not judging, because a lot of people are pretty hostile towards the church. They really have a nostalgic feeling of the Olympics should be what it was, and I get that. But I also look at, if the church hadn't bought it, it would have been torn down, and that whole thing would have been redeveloped. So I approached the church and I approached the pastors. At one point, they let me shoot inside the building. Then retroactively, one of the members of the church, who was a part of the hierarchy, said, "You do not have the right to use that footage. You do not have the right. We do not want you. We are trying to rid the evils of the mosh pits." It was a fun letter. It's like, it was so hostile, and my letter was so respectful and trying to be so, anyway. And they were just the mosh pits and the violence, and we've spent years trying to rid ourselves of that, and you can't use that footage. And I probably could have, because I did have the permission before, but I realized that I didn't want a legal fight, and I could shoot the outside without any, that's absolutely my right to do. So I have that footage. It's, it was something we considered, but what I really wanted, my original idea for the ending for this was because what's interesting about the inside of the building now is the light ring, where the ring was and where people bled and died and everything else is still there. And under it they pushed the pulpit to one side of the building, and under this is where people speak to God. And they have this it's very ecstatic Christianity where they're talking to Jesus under that spot. And I was that would be a perfect way to connect, because in a way the violence and prayer and that ecstatic experience is very connected, yeah. And so that was my original idea, and since I couldn't do that, that was just it ended. So that's the reason we didn't include it. Was I wanted to embrace the community, and in fact, I became friends with some of the pastors, and I did some homeless outreach with one of the pastors, and became close. But it was a real battle with the church, because I think they have a lot of for multiple reasons. They have one of which I think is real estate, which is a typical LA thing too, is they have problems with me.
My second question was like, with the knowledge that you guys have of like what the Olympic Auditorium was, what place now would you say is closest like that?
I don't know anything.
I don't I think that was, one of the, we thought about that but I think that the whole sort of end of the film is sort of this idea that the spirit lives on. There's no central place anymore like the Olympic. There's more like fragmented scenes that have aspects of that spirit. So it's not as though people don't have the interest in elements of that, the cultures that thrive within the Olympic. It's more that, things have atomized so much now. There's no one big, mass entertainment is so hard. Because everyone has, their own specific interests that are all catered to. So it's really rare to kind of have a place like the Olympic that can be that sort of hub of a culture.
I don't think you're ever going to have it again. The place that you could go boxing, wrestling, roller derby, and a little richer.
Yeah. And very little security. And these days, you couldn't imagine a place where, it was there was, Gary, you had some security, right? But it wasn't, these days you couldn't do that, right?
The insurance would be too high.
Yeah. Couldn't make it go.
But I did think that when I did my shows, punk rockers gathered from all of Southern California, and somebody from Orange County might not see somebody from Ventura only at that spot.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like a measuring stick on the scene. It was 5,000 people when New York City was doing 1,500.
Yeah.
In Chicago, maybe 800.
100.
What?
100.
100.
Yeah, I think that was the amazing thing about the Olympic. And the thing about Eileen was that, it became her life. And before Eileen, the building had success, but never was financially successful. And after Eileen, it had success, but was never financially successful. So it really does show, what the power of one driven person can be, who's smart and absolutely committed. And she was so committed, that building was her identity. It was really her. And so that was why the film, I felt like, there were so many different ways to go with the movie, but I felt like, she was the heart and soul and the blood and spirit of that dirty old funky building, So that's what I think was what was so great about it, and why it mattered. Why does it matter to tell the story now? People have asked that question, and I'm like, well, this was popular culture of this time, and we learned from our history, and it still resonates with people. That's why so many of you are here, and that's why people, the Plaza decided, hey, yeah, it's worth doing a 2-tour exhibition on this thing. The resonance that it's had for generations, I think it still has something to say about, whether it's, even though maybe there can't be a building like the Olympic again, there is something in that fire, there's something in that counterculture, there's something in that platform that existed for outsiders that mattered. And that's why I think it was worthy of doing this film and doing something on it.
Another question. I think to the question of I think the spirit of the Olympic lives on in like the StubHub, the Home Depot Center, in terms of boxing. I think there's some amazing classics that, not the same, but spirit of the Olympic that I would say for my era, my generation. But my question was, I mean, you've seen Cheech, like boxing, the narratives, the stories that are used to sell it, right? And one of the most famous narratives is obviously Mexico versus Puerto Rico, but we've had Art Aragon fighting as the Mexican American versus the Mexican national, or who's the more Mexican. So like from your experience, I mean, I'm thinking about born in East LA and thinking about like not being from here or there as a Chicano. What are some of the most memorable Mexican American, more Mexican, less Mexican rivalries that you saw in the Olympic or in other venues, not just in boxing?
Oh, well, they had that. Mano Ramos, all of his fights, man, were kind of characterized that way. But there was I didn't put on 50 full boxing cards a year. 50 every Tuesday night, man.
Can you imagine that? I mean, that's I think just
there's nowhere in the world that does that now, and so it was the scramble, but heroes used to come up really quick, and they faced a lot of opponents, Mexican or Mexican American, and the heat would build for that particular bout until somebody got knocked out, and then they bring the next guy in. I don't know, and I was a little kid during the boxing era, and no, I was a little kid during the wrestling era, and then the boxing era. I was a little older, but I wasn't there every Tuesday night, even though I was in the neighborhood. So there's only so much sass you can take.
But in terms of the idea of that feeling of are you Mexican enough by being a Mexican American, can you talk a little bit about that dynamic in your own personal life and how
Yeah, it was always, it depends on where you lived. I lived in an all black neighborhood, so I was always Mexican, and then I worked to an all white neighborhood, and I was always Mexican. So I don't know what changed. But it was always, we were always fighting that dynamic. Where do you fit in, and what school do you go to, where are you from? Big question. And so that was always the play. But I lived half of my life in South Central and half of my life in Granada Hills. So one day everybody was black, and then the next day everybody was white. How do we know?
And I think that was one of the things that fascinated me about your life is like this, and how it echoes with the Olympics, this multiplicity of identities, and how the Olympic appealed. It was strongly Mexican and Mexican American, but there's also African American, there's also Filipino, there's also there's a range of ethnic identities. And battles, and neighborhood battles, and battles that mattered within the city, Long Beach versus Wilmington, East LA versus, the Valley. All of these things were going on, and that there was neighborhood, identity is such a fascinating subject, and
that's going on since the beginning of boxing as a popular sport. There was always the one neighborhood or one ethnicity pitted against the other.
And at a time, even within East LA, it was Keeney Turan, who I think was from the Flats, versus Gil Cadilli. Is that Gene? What was their?
That was like Roosevelt versus Garfield.
Yeah. Okay, so we still got it. We got it going on. What other question?
Listening to your talk and growing up not too far from here, why wasn't the Olympic made a historical landmark?
I don't know. Well, it's a good. I have my, my my feelings are is that it because it was sports that were kind of outside of what's considered main. They're just boxing was always considered on the edge of things. Wrestling was disreputable. Roller derby was low class considered. And it was a lot of brown people and black people. I think that it was sort of just, it was considered disposable culture. And I think that there was a disrespect for what actually happened there and why it actually really did matter. So I feel like there's some bit of racism there. But I also think that that part of LA, where it was, there's a lot of reasons, but I think that there would be, I've certainly spoken with the LA Conservancy, I've spoken with historians, I've spoken with a lot of people in the preservation community who have told me that the building certainly fits the criteria of a landmark on every level, both even though it's been sort of the architecture has been kind of marred, they tore off, but it was designed by Edward Stanley Underwood, who designed the postal annex right next to Union Station, beautiful building. He's an AIA architect who designed the Alwani Inn at Yosemite. He designed Desmond's department store in the Miracle Mile. He's a famous architect. So from that connection, that's a criteria that, yes, it's famous architect, a building of that. Culturally, historically, all the movies that were shot there, which again, it's like, in an 85-minute movie, we didn't get enough time to spend talking about all the movies that were shot, from Raging Bull to Rocky to Buster Keaton to Three Stooges. I mean, you see them, but you don't really. There's many criteria in which it certainly is eligible to be a landmark. Whether or not it will ever become one, they've told me that, look, we have our eye on it, the Conservancy. If we see a demo permit or something like that, yeah, we will step in. So I'm hopeful that that's the case. But I don't know, because I really don't know what the church, I don't know if they're going to be there forever. I get the feeling that that if they got a good offer, they would sell that. Because it's a 6-acre site, prime with a rail link right there. There's a metro station right in front of it. So it's a redevelopment opportunity for somebody, and they recently rezoned it. So I don't think that story is written yet fully, but I would certainly fight for it, and hopefully y'all would also fight for the Olympic to be saved on some level. We have time for one more question. So Gene?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, Cheech, we're so happy that you're here. Spend time with us, watch a movie with us. And, in the history of comedy, in our era, there was Richard Pryor, George Carlin, but we had Cheech and Chong. I remember, you guys came and invested in our community. You went to, I saw you at Music Plaza, Monterey Park. You signed my Sleeping Beauty album, 1976. And then also, you guys went to Sounds of Music there in East LA with Carlos Reyes over there with the oldie shop. But thank you for coming out. And I want to tell the audience also that Steve and I, along with Karen Cruz and Esperanza Sanchez, where are you? Raise up your hand. There you are. Thank you for being the curators with me and Steve. Without you guys, we couldn't do it, along with Alicia. Where is Alicia? There she is. Alicia in the back row. But thank you all, and I express from the bottom of my heart And I encourage everyone to go see the exhibit at La Plaza. Wednesday through Sunday, free, 12 to 5. Everybody go watch it.
Here, yes, thank you. Yeah, please do. Come see the exhibition if you haven't, or you want to come back again, it's free, and it's, a lot of the images and artifacts and uniforms and ring gear and Daniel Lopez's headdress and all of those things are in this exhibition. So if you haven't had a chance, please come out. We have some incredible photography too, including work of Merrick Morton, who's here today, and there's probably some other folks who I haven't acknowledged, but anyway, thank you all. Thanks to La Plaza for supporting this, and appreciate it. Have a great night.
All right.